Hi, I'm Paul. I just want to make this video to respond to a question that I received on one of my last videos. The video was about the soul being the right hemisphere of the brain, and the ego being the left hemisphere of the brain, and the way that we view the external world through different sides of our brain. And the question that I received was quite a long question, very detailed, however, seems very good and quite accurate. However, I don't really know how you're experiencing what we're talking about just from reading your words, so I can't really comment too much on what you're actually saying. So I figured I would just pick out some points on what you did talk about, and just give a bit more detailed on the way I'm trying to share it. So some of the things that you mentioned, you've mentioned about the soul and spirit. You did mention that perhaps at this point you're not able to see that the soul doesn't exist, which I'm going to mainly focus on that in this video. You also talked about ever-presence. I think what you're referring to is ever-presence being the infinite universal consciousness, the eternal, whichever words you want to describe. So firstly, I'm just going to start off with a quick brief one on ego. I don't know if it relates anything to do with you, but I just thought I'd mention it because I think it's a mistake that many people make when we refer to the ego and people who are trying to become awake and self-aware or try to lose the ego. So it seems that a lot of people believe that the ego is the thoughts that you have. And I used to think this also until the ego slipped away and it became obvious that the thoughts do continue. So what became clear then was the ego is the thing which grabs onto the thoughts to make it mine, to fulfill the story of the ego. So the thoughts still actually happen, but the ego like grabs on to them thoughts. So even when the ego falls away, the thoughts still do continue, but it's as if we don't seem to stick to anything. So if we said also that emotions are only stories, so they're the stories which create the illusion of the I, meaning the ego I. And when you've got these emotions and thoughts arise, the I wants to grab onto some of them thoughts or decline some of them thoughts to fulfill the emotions of the story of I. When the ego falls away, the thoughts still do continue, but they just don't stick on to the I. So moving on to what you mentioned with you can't quite accept that the soul isn't real, because in my video I did say that the soul isn't real, but it does appear to be, in the same way that the ego is real. Sorry, the ego is not real, but it does appear to be. So both, in a sense, are illusions, but we'll come on to that, because what I'm describing of a soul might not be quite the same as your experience of the soul. So that's why I want to go into a little bit more detail, just to try and clarify that. So when I say about the soul, I refer to when people say, I have a soul. It's that I have a soul which creates a separation. And as we know, there isn't a separation, everything is one. So it's that soul that I refer to as, it's not real, but it does appear to be. But there is still much more that is happening, kind of, let's say, behind the scenes, which I think there is a bit of a confusion with what people refer to as a soul. And I think this is where you're speaking of the spirit as well. So I think Sri Ramana Maharshi, he tried to describe this by saying, if you'd imagine a projection screen, and the images what get projected onto the screen are the illusion, and the screen is the ever-presence. I'm not going to use this term because I think in this day and age people are so used to the fact that what gets projected onto a screen is just an illusion because of the films what we see, and obviously they are an illusion. But I just want to talk a bit more on the illusion. I think the only real full illusion is the I, as in the ego I. Like I say, things still happen like thoughts, and that in a sense is real. We'll get more onto that, but not real also. But the only true full illusion is the I that says, I want that story, or that's me, or that's not me, or the fact that it triggers off the emotions, which are also just stories. So the only true illusion is the ego I. So instead of trying to describe this as the projection screen and the image on the projection screen, I'm going to describe it as a pot of soil. So if we was to say that we had a plant pot full of soil, the soil in the plant pot is the infinite. So when I say infinite, I'm not referring to it being an endless amount of soil, or like a piece of string that never ends. I'm referring to the infinite as in the ever-presence, never changing. So the soil will always be the soil. We could also refer this to our mind, but we could call that as in the space in our mind. So the ever-presence being the space. And from that space we can create things out of that space. But let's just stick with the soil. So we've got a pot of soil, and the soil is the infinite, the ever-presence. And what comes out of the soil would be the plant. So in a way we could kind of say the plant is an illusion, but it's not quite the same as the illusion of the I, because clearly something is coming out of the pot. So it's probably easier to call that, if we're saying the soil is the ever-presence, then the plant coming out of it would be, let's say, temporary. I can't think of the right word at the moment, but it's changeable. So the plant can come out of the soil, and eventually the plant will die away, and then another plant can grow, and then that dies away, and so on. So although in a sense we could say it is kind of an illusion because it's not the ever-presence, however something is still happening. And that's like the thoughts. So the thoughts are still coming out of the soil, or thoughts come out of consciousness, but they also go back into consciousness afterwards. So the only true illusion is the I that tries to claim onto them. So getting back to the soul and the spirit, if you was to say that the soul was the ever-presence and not attached to you, then we can say, well, yeah, that's probably about right. But you also mentioned spirit. And I think what you're referring to with spirit is the spirit is the soil. So the soil being the eternal, the infinite, the ever-present, never-changing. But the soil refers to everything. So the ever-presence is me and you, and the tree, and the stick on the floor, and all of that is one. So the soil, the ever-presence is all one. So we are all one. The only thing that makes it appear to be a separation is the ego. Likes to create separation to claim that it is separate. So what I'm referring to is the soul. If you refer the soul to I have a soul, that would also be separate. So that would be something that comes out of consciousness. And so therefore it's not entirely an illusion. It's real, as long as you know that it's not the ever-presence. In my video, I was trying to refer the soul in a way that people say, I have a soul. And what I'm trying to describe is, if you refer to I have a soul, then that would be a separation. So therefore, that is not real, but still appears to be. But if we was to call the ever-present, the soil, the spirit, then we could say, yeah, the spirit's definitely real. If you're saying, calling that the soul, then we could say, yeah, the soul is definitely real as well. But, like I say, that's the oneness. As long as it's the ever-present, the infinite, it is the oneness, and there's no separation. So if you say, I have a soul, then you would have to say, there is a soul, and that soul is everything. And you could also call that a spirit. But then you would have to say, well, there is a spirit, and that spirit is everything. So, like I say, I didn't really know fully from your wording how you experience it. So I just wanted to add a little bit more in depth of the reason why I was saying the soul is not real but appears to be. So I hope this might help. After hearing that you did a lot of research on narcissism, which is much the same as me, and you've reached this point and it sounds like we're going down the same path, I'd be quite interested maybe to even speak to you at some point in the future. I'm sure we would have a lot to share. One other point as well that I'll mention, I don't know whether you still stick with narcissism, but at some point I kind of realised that there is a time that I need to move away from narcissism, even though I studied it for a long time and got to understand it really well. Because the more interest that I shown in narcissism made me only see narcissism in the same way that if I was to buy myself a new car, let's say a Ford Focus, then all I would see on the road was Ford Focuses and not see the bigger picture of everything that's happening. I'm not saying that this is in your case, but that was just something that I kind of started to notice in myself. But anyway, thanks very much for listening. Thank you for your question. It was really interesting to read it. Take care.